90,000 years. That is how long Neanderthals survived on this planet, enduring ice ages, predators, and every environmental catastrophe Earth could throw at them. They were physically more powerful than we are, built with denser bones and heavier muscle for the brutal European cold. And their brains were measurably, consistently larger than the average modern human brain. They possessed deep emotional complexity. At the Shanidar cave excavation in modern Iraq, archaeologists found pollen evidence suggesting a Neanderthal was buried on a bed of carefully arranged wildflowers. We also found remains of severely injured individuals who survived for years, kept alive only because their group actively fed and protected them. They engaged in systematic experimentation. They built composite stone tools, which requires abstract planning, and by 50,000 BCE, they had learned to use manganese dioxide as a chemical fire accelerant. The archaeological record describes an elite human survivor, physically and intellectually refined for a landscape that would have killed a modern human in weeks. Then, roughly 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens arrived. We were physically smaller, noticeably weaker, and far less adapted to the bitter cold. Just 3,000 years later, a massive volcanic eruption in what is now Italy put both species to the ultimate test. The companion ignimbrite eruption ejected enough material into the atmosphere to trigger a continent-wide volcanic winter. The skies darkened, temperatures plummeted, and the prey animals that both species depended on died off or vanished. Both species faced the exact same catastrophe, yet the stronger, better adapted Neanderthals disappeared, while the weaker newcomers survived. To understand why this happened, researchers at the University of California and the Max Planck Institute assembled the largest genetic dataset ever collected on Neanderthals. This map of Ice Age Europe plots out their populations based on new genetic data. It reveals Neanderthals lived in small, isolated groups. Populations just 200 kilometers apart show zero genetic exchange, no movement between valleys. In sociology, there's a concept known as the strength of weak ties. Humans rely on two types of relationships: strong ties, your intimate family and fiercely loyal friends, and weak ties, your distant acquaintances and occasional trade partners. Neanderthal society relied entirely on strong ties. They possessed deep loyalty to their immediate group, but they lacked any weak ties connecting them to anyone beyond their own immediate territory. Strong ties provide emotional support, but weak ties provide information. When a volcanic winter wipes out the local food supply, having a family willing to die for you cannot save you if nobody knows where the surviving herds went. Homo sapiens brought a different social architecture with them into Europe, a sprawling, continent-wide network of weak ties. The archaeological record proves this invisible network existed. We find decorative seashells and regional flint scattered hundreds of kilometers from their geographic origins. Looking at this map of early Homo sapiens settlements, we see complex, overlapping webs. These objects moved because people were moving, passing trade goods and vital geographic information from group to group. When the volcanic winter starved out a valley, Homo sapiens could tap into this network. They could move safely through territories where distant acquaintances recognized them as trading partners, and they could follow information passed down the chain to locate the migrating prey. When the prey disappeared, our network of acquaintances gave us a way out. The Neanderthals, lacking any distant allies, starved alone. But this graph tracks both species' population levels through the disaster, and it reveals a disturbing detail. The Homo sapiens population also plummeted. We barely avoided the zero axis before slowly recovering. Our much-praised social network was actually a thin line. We had just enough connectivity to scrape through a winter that killed off a species far stronger than us. Today, our 7 billion human beings form the densest technological network in the history of life on Earth. Yet, structurally, we are retreating. We are increasingly fracturing into isolated groups built almost entirely on strong ties, demanding loyalty to our specific group, while allowing our broader connections, our weak ties, to wither. The Neanderthals were alone, and isolation, in the wrong moment, against the wrong catastrophe, is fatal regardless of how intelligent you are.
But there is one detail about this story that becomes even stranger the longer you think about it. Because Neanderthals are not completely gone. Not entirely. If you are of European or Asian ancestry. Somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA came from them, which means that at some point, these two human species did not just fight or compete. They met. They spoke. They trusted each other long enough to raise children together. And that changes the emotional weight of this story completely. Because extinction suddenly becomes harder to define. The Neanderthals vanished as a civilization, but fragments of them survived inside the species that replaced them. Inside us. Right now. Your immune system may still carry Neanderthal adaptations that helped humans survive unfamiliar diseases after migrating into Eurasia. Some researchers believe certain Neanderthal genes still influence sleep patterns, pain sensitivity, metabolism, even depression and addiction risk today. 40,000 years later, they are still affecting how human bodies function. Which means this is not really the story of one species defeating another. It is the story of two human worlds colliding during one of the harshest periods in prehistoric history. And only one network surviving intact. Think about what that would have looked like. Small fires burning across frozen Europe. Tiny groups moving through valleys under skies darkened by volcanic ash. Humans searching for food in a world becoming colder, emptier, and more unpredictable every year. And somewhere out there, another kind of human, watching the same skies, hearing the same wind, trying to survive the same collapsing world. There is a tendency to imagine history as inevitable, as if Homo sapiens were always destined to dominate the planet. But this study suggests something deeply uncomfortable. If the volcanic winter had lasted slightly longer, if the trade networks between early human groups had been slightly weaker, if a few migration routes had failed, you might not exist. Not metaphorically, literally. The chain of people required to produce every human alive today was unbelievably fragile. And for a brief moment, 40,000 years ago, it almost broke completely. That is the real meaning of this discovery. Not that humans were superior. Not that Neanderthals were inferior. But that survival is often determined by invisible systems nobody notices until they fail. Relationships, movement, information, weak ties. Things that seem unimportant right up until the moment they become the only reason anyone survives. Maybe that explains something deeper about civilization itself. The societies that survive are usually the ones that stay connected. Trade, knowledge, information, connection. Again and again, history repeats the same lesson. Connected societies survive shocks better than isolated ones. But connection creates new dangers too. A virus becomes global. A financial crash spreads everywhere. A war disrupts entire continents. The same network that made Homo sapiens unstoppable also made modern civilization fragile. And suddenly, this stops feeling like ancient history. Because millions of people today are more connected than ever, while feeling more alone than ever. Strong ties shrink. Weak ties disappear. Communities fracture. Exactly the pattern this study identified as dangerous. The Neanderthals were not defeated because they were weaker. They disappeared because they faced catastrophe alone. And evolution never guarantees permanence.